Taehyung found the hidden real name inside Jungkook, tattooed during filming, but his sudden reaction left everyone speechless and halted production instantly. "You put that name on your body." Taehyung's voice dropped low, controlled, but sharp enough to pierce the ambient buzz of the studio. His words weren't loud, but the microphones caught every syllable like they were engineered to capture heartbreak. The camera lenses were still recording, expecting laughter, expecting harmless banter, not an emotional fracture that would rewrite the energy of the room in real time. Makeup artists froze mid-blot. Powder puffs hovered like time itself had stalled. Just moments before, it had been an easy shoot, a breezy behind-the-scenes documentary. Jimin had been leaning toward a ring light, grinning as he explained the 10-step hydration routine he swore could resurrect anyone's skin, including the dry epidermis of exhausted idols. Jungkook had been rolling his eyes affectionately, teasing him about owning more serums than socks. The producer had been half listening while scrolling through monitors glowing with color-coded audio levels. The director had been sipping iced coffee, mentally editing a cut that didn't exist yet. The lighting team bathed the set in golden warmth, the kind that makes idols look effortlessly soft. Jungkook sat relaxed, one sneaker tapping the floor like a metronome tuned to mischief. He smirked at Jimin. "At this point, your toner budget could fund a comeback." Jimin laughed. Staff smiled without thinking. Jungkook grinned back, victorious, ready to push the joke further. Then Jungkook tugged up his sleeve and casually said, "Hey T, did you ever really look closely at this one?" He pointed at the ink running across his inner bicep. The tattoo was a lattice of elegant curved lines, abstract enough to pass as pure aesthetics. A design that felt like motion. Nothing strange, nothing suspicious, just art. Taehyung tilted his head, curious. At first nothing, then confusion, then recognition hit like a surge, because hidden inside the weave of the ink was a name, not a symbol, a real name, a person. A name Taehyung thought Jungkook had buried long ago, and it wasn't his. Taehyung didn't say it aloud at first. He just stared, lips slightly parted, breathing shallow like the air had thinned around him. Jimin was still smiling, unaware the moment had shifted. Jungkook's expression remained hopeful. Taehyung's eyes were elsewhere now, scanning memory, replaying a past he had tried to forget. His pupils weren't reflecting studio lights anymore. They were reflecting a name. Eugene. "Who told you to put that name on your body?" Taehyung finally asked, voice trembling, not loud but unstable like a fault line opening. "You said you'd never speak about her again." Jungkook's smile faded. I didn't think it mattered anymore." "Didn't think it?" Taehyung echoed, disbelief cracking through him. Cameras were still rolling. Monitors still watched. Staff barely breathed because tension doesn't wait for direction. Jimin finally looked up, sensing the room had changed temperature without warning. The director whispered, "Cut." But nobody pressed stop. You can cut a scene, you can't cut a moment. And that was the hook. The moment the documentary stopped being casual and became forensic. The moment the crew stopped being professionals and became witnesses. The moment Taehyung discovered a hidden name that was never meant to be decoded. The tension didn't vanish when the director whispered cut. If anything, it calcified into something sharper, quieter, more dangerous. Production had been paused, not by command, but by the collective instinct of people who knew that continuing would be like trying to film through an earthquake. The cameras were technically still on, but nobody dared touch the equipment. A red tally light glowed on one of the main rigs like a quiet accusation. Taehyung had already disappeared down the corridor, moving faster than anyone expected, long legs eating up the hallway like he was trying to outrun the sound of his own voice echoing in his head. Jimin stood there for a beat, processing hand, still holding the toner bottle like a prop from a scene that belonged to another timeline. Jungkook remained seated, jaw tight, staring at the floor like a man who knew the damage had nothing to do with ink and everything to do with history. The producer exhaled slowly and muted the feed to the control room, even though there was nothing to mute. The silence was the sound now. It was suffocating, not the awkward kind, the existential kind. The kind that makes everyone suddenly aware of how thin the air feels when three people stop speaking. Taehyung hadn't planned to react like that. It wasn't part of the script. It wasn't even part of the subconscious choreography of the documentary they were making. But when he saw the name woven into the ink, something snapped. Not just emotionally, but narratively. Because this wasn't a reveal, it was a resurrection. A ghost pulled into daylight without consent. Jimin finally placed the toner down on a makeup table and turned toward Jungkook, who was still sitting in the same posture, shoulders stiff, face unreadable. "He really walked off," Jimin said, voice low, like someone narrating a crime scene they didn't want to describe. Jungkook didn't answer. He just blinked slowly, like each blink was buying him another second before reality forced him to speak. Jimin looked toward the corridor where Taehyung vanished. Then he started walking. Not fast, not slow, determined, like someone who knows the next scene won't wait for him to emotionally render. Taehyung had reached the green room door before he realized Jimin was chasing him. Jimin called out his name twice, but Taehyung didn't look back. He didn't need to. The cameras caught the chase anyway. They always do, even when the subject is silence. Jimin finally caught the door just as it slammed shut, palm hitting the cold surface, voice cracking. Wait, please." But the door didn't reopen. Not immediately. Not on cue. Not for politeness. The latch clicked halfway but not fully. A detail nobody noticed until later, but one that would matter in the next emotional detonation. Taehyung didn't answer the knock. He heard it. 3 soft raps at first, hesitant like someone testing the emotional waters. Then louder like urgency was compressing politeness into something secondary. But Taehyung didn't speak. Didn't move. He sat on the floor, back against the wall, jacket crumpled under him, eyes locked on nothing, like the wall in front of him was a projection screen playing a film only he could see. His jaw clenched so tightly his temple throbbed like a pulse in an overdriven audio cable. Outside the door, Jimin slid down slowly, sitting with his spine against the hallway wall, breathing shallow. "Taehyung," he called again, voice trembling like static under a vinyl track. "Open the door, please." Inside, Taehyung finally spoke, not loudly, not theatrically, but sharp enough to cut through drywall. "You lied to me too." The words were muffled by door but clear in meaning, glass pressed to skin. "You lied to me too." Jimin closed his eyes, chest tightening. "I didn't know, I swear. I didn't know until I saw it." Taehyung scoffed, voice low, brittle. "You think that makes it better?" "It's not about better," Jimin said. "It's about truth." "No," Taehyung snapped, voice detonating suddenly loud enough to rattle the hallway acoustics. "It's about who still gets to keep secrets, and who pays the price when they're revealed." Jimin didn't respond immediately, because some responses are delayed not by silence, but by emotional bandwidth. A staffer monitoring the live feed from the control room saw the audio spike, flinched, then turned to another staffer, unsure whether to intervene. But nobody intervenes in the hallway moments. Not when history is performing better than any scriptwriter ever could. Back on set, Jungkook finally stood up, not to chase, not to defend, but because some silences demand motion. The producer watched the empty chairs where Taehyung and Jimin had been moments earlier. He didn't reach for the mic, didn't shout, didn't ask for them to return. He simply let the silence play, because the silence was part of the documentary now, the real documentary, the one nobody planned to make. The green room door stayed slightly ajar, a detail that felt almost symbolic now, like the universe had decided the truth didn't deserve a fully closed latch. Taehyung hadn't opened it intentionally, but it opened anyway, pulled by physics, not forgiveness. The hinge sighed faintly as Jimin stepped inside, breath thin, emotions thick, as if the air in the room had been aging like unreleased footage stored in a forgotten archive. Taehyung was still on the floor, head tilted back against the wall. Eyes red but not wet, the kind of redness that comes from internal combustion, not tears. Jimin sat beside him slowly, quietly, like someone sitting next to a bonfire they didn't start but knew they had to survive. The envelope, the tattoo, the past, all of it hovered in the space between them like particles suspended in a sunbeam that refused to warm the mood. "She lied to you too," Jimin said finally, voice steady but hollow at the core, like a bell that rings true but doesn't echo comfort. "We all got burned by her." Taehyung turned his head a few degrees. Slow, mechanical, like each degree required processing power his heart didn't want to spend. "But you weren't the one who was in love with her." The words landed heavy, heavier than the table they once slammed, heavier than the guitar that had shattered against a wall in another era. Jimin inhaled, long, shaky, deliberate. "No," he said. "I was, but I watched what she did to you. I watched you break." Taehyung didn't blink. That silence, that cold focus, that stare that felt like 3 a.m. winter air pressed into a human expression. He finally spoke. "She told me she was going to marry me." Jimin's breath hitched. He had known fragments of the story, but not the emotional ledger behind them. Jungkook had never shared the full invoice of pain. He had only shown receipts of silence. "She told me the same," Jungkook said quietly from the doorway, voice low, tone forensic, posture rigid. Both of them turned, startled not by his presence, but by the fact that he had been there long enough to absorb the conversation like a microphone left on by accident. "You two got closer after she left," Taehyung said, standing now, body stiff, grief tightening every tendon like tension wires behind a stage curtain. "While I was shutting down, locking myself in hotel bathrooms to cry, you two were laughing again." Jimin stood too, wounded but composed, voice breaking slightly at the edges. "That wasn't because we didn't care. That was the only way we could breathe." Taehyung shook his head, packing toward the door. "You replaced me." "We never replaced you," Jungkook said, stepping forward, palms slamming the wall beside the door. Not violent enough to injure, but emotional enough to spike audio levels in the memory of anyone who witnessed it. "Don't twist this." Taehyung stopped walking. The room froze again. But this time, it froze like a photograph taken at the exact moment before a storm realizes it doesn't have to destroy everything to prove it's real. "You removed the ink," Taehyung said finally, voice lower now, quieter, like a thundercloud learning compression. "But I don't know if that removes what she did to us." Jungkook exhaled, shoulders dropping by a centimeter. 1 centimeter can carry more emotional significance than a paragraph when the silence has lasted long enough. "No," he said, "but I want to start cleaning up what's left." Taehyung laughed, not mocking this time but bitter, a laugh that tastes like unsent messages typed at midnight and deleted before sunrise. "You think people will care about the truth?" Jimin walked toward him, standing between them instinctively, posture mediator, voice human. "I think they deserve the truth, even if it's messy." Taehyung looked at both of them, eyes scanning faces he had memorized before the world ever learned their stage names. "I'm not ready to forgive," he said, "but I'm not leaving this room either." Jimin nodded. No celebration, no dramatic soundtrack, just acknowledgement, the kind of nod that doesn't trend but rebuilds. Jungkook glanced at the monitor behind the makeup mirror, the screen still paused on the frozen frame of a past that had already gone viral in their veins. "Then say it," Jimin urged. "Say what you need to say to him. Don't just stand there." Jungkook looked at Taehyung, voice tightening, regret coiling like faded ink lines he no longer physically carried. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you the truth when you needed it most. I'm sorry I let her pit us against each other. And I'm sorry I ever let her name become a scar you had to carry alone." Taehyung didn't answer immediately, because healing doesn't run on real time. Taehyung's shoulders sinking by a centimeter didn't mean peace. It meant gravity. The kind of gravity that pulls truth downward, not out of sight, but into the chest where it can finally be felt instead of avoided. The green room door stayed ajar behind them, still humming with unresolved energy, like the set itself refused to cut to commercial break. Jimin and Jungkook stood a few feet away, bracing for words that might not come, but Taehyung didn't need to speak to make the room shift again. His silence had layers now. Texture, history, consequence. A silence that wasn't empty anymore, it was occupied, furnished with the ghosts of choices they all made without understanding the full cost. Jimin reached for a chair, slowly turning it around, letting the legs scrape faintly against the floor. It wasn't a loud sound, but it carried. Everything carries when nobody else is speaking. He sat down facing Taehyung, posture deliberate like someone addressing a friend, not a camera, not a production timeline, not an audience hungry for villains and angels, but a person sitting beside the wreckage of a past he didn't choose alone. Jungkook followed suit, pulling the other chair, sitting without theatrics. No packing, no slamming, no sound spikes, just presence. The kind of presence that doesn't trend but holds the frame together when a story has threatened to split into 3 different genres at once. Taehyung finally pushed himself off the wall, standing fully now. He didn't brush the dust off his jeans. He let it stay. Dust is honest. His jacket was still crumpled under him like discarded armor from a battle nobody was trained for, but all of them had fought anyway. He walked toward the table. Slow. Intentional. A scene still unscripted but now dangerously real. "I don't know how to calibrate this," Taehyung said finally, voice low, rough around the edges like a vinyl record replayed too many times. "Not the tattoo, not the reveal, the moment after." Jimin nodded. "You don't calibrate it, you survive it, then you rewrite." Jungkook looked at Taehyung's arm, not the ink but the faint scars left behind. The scars were quiet, almost shy, but scars don't need volume to speak. "I had it removed 3 months ago," Jungkook repeated, quieter this time, almost ashamed to resurrect the sentence again. "Not to erase her, to erase the reason you had to bleed alone." Taehyung exhaled. The exhale carried the weight of a monsoon season folding into winter. "But the real scar wasn't the ink," he said. "It was the silence around it." The producer outside the door had been listening without listening, leaning against a wall in the hallway where truth often leaks before it gets edited. He turned toward another staffer and whispered, "We're not rolling B-roll anymore. This is the film." The staffer swallowed hard, because everyone knows when a moment has rewritten the scriptwriter. Taehyung sat down finally. No dramatic sigh, no camera zoom, just the slow collapse of someone choosing to stay in the frame, choosing not to abandon the narrative even when it had betrayed the intended genre. Jimin placed his hand on the table first. Taehyung stared at it like someone offering him a bridge made of bone and honesty. He didn't take it yet. He only looked at it long enough for meaning to load. "You want me to hate him for this?" Jimin asked Taehyung, voice softer now, as if the hallway confrontation had left a permanent softness in his throat. "Because I don't know how." Taehyung didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at Jungkook, not the ink, the person. "I want to know why you forgave him." Jimin inhaled, long, shaky, deliberate. "Because I didn't want to lose him, even if he never truly let go of her, even then." Taehyung's jaw tightened again, but not for the same reason. This time it tightened like someone remembering that rage can coexist with love without invalidating either. "Well," he said, "I'm not that strong." Jungkook looked at him sharply. "You are, you just don't spend it cheaply." Silence again, but not suffocating, not awkward, a pregnant silence. The kind that tells the viewer the real story hasn't ended, it's only finally begun to deserve its runtime. Jimin leaned forward. "Then don't forgive her yet, just sit with it, let it sting." Taehyung nodded once. "Fine," he said, "but we tell the truth ourselves next time, not the world's version, ours." Jimin blinked, Jungkook blinked. The crew would blink about it later. Truth is a dangerous thing to hand to the internet, but it's even more dangerous to leave unclaimed. Taehyung understood that now. Not because he wanted to, but because the world had already grabbed the edges of the story and pulled. when a narrative escapes. It doesn't disappear, it multiplies. The hallway outside the green room was still but not calm. Stillness and calm are not synonyms. Calm doesn't vibrate, stillness does. The editing room down the hall was glowing like a digital vault that had been cracked open, spilling fragments of audio, video, and history into places they never planned to send it. A studio can hold cameras. It can't hold consequences. Taehyung stood up again, but this time it wasn't an exit. It was motion toward confrontation, toward responsibility, toward a truth that had grown too large for drawers, too loud for whispers, too viral for the original production budget of their emotions. He walked toward the monitor like someone approaching their own reflection after years of avoiding mirrors. Jimin was already scrolling through messages on his phone. He wasn't reading comments anymore, he was reading theories. Dozens, hundreds. Threads nested inside threads like someone had turned pain into a fractal. The word Eugene was everywhere now, misinterpreted, romanticized, weaponized, misunderstood, and worst of all possessed, not by her. By silence they should have expected. Taehyung stopped behind him. "Give me the phone," he said, not forceful, not angry, inevitable. The kind of tone you use when you know this is part of the scene now, even if the cameras aren't rolling. Jimin looked up at him for a moment. He didn't ask why. Some moments graduate past why. He handed the phone over. Taehyung scrolled once, twice, slowly, like someone dragging a metal detector over soil where a landmine used to live. The notifications buzzed under his thumb like a warning siren translated into digital Morse code. Fans weren't just reacting anymore. They were writing mythology. Jungkook stepped into the doorway, watching him scroll without expression, like a man who knew his apology would trend before it would heal. "I didn't plan to expose it," Jungkook said quietly, "but I did plan to remove it." Taehyung looked up from the phone. "You removed it from your arm, not from the timeline." Jungkook nodded once. The nod was heavier than the guitar that once broke. He knew it. The internet doesn't know subtraction, only copies. Taehyung placed the phone down on the table, not gently, not harshly, definitively, the kind of placement that carries finality without needing sound design. Then we give them the original, not the scar, the surgery. Jimin blinked. "You want to post the letter?" "No," Taehyung said. "I want to post the context." Jungkook frowned slightly. "Context isn't viral." "Exactly," Taehyung replied. "Which is why we have to release it before fiction fills the frame." The producer outside the room finally stepped forward. He didn't interrupt. He only observed. Documentary staff don't always hold cameras. Sometimes they hold doors. Taehyung exhaled again. "They think she was the story, she was the catalyst, we were the narrative." Jimin leaned forward. "Fans don't hate details, they hate vacuums." Jungkook finally sat down again, mirroring their earlier posture. "Then let it sting in public." Taehyung shook his head. "No, let it sting in truth. Truth bleeds slower, it leaves fewer martyrs." Jimin looked toward the monitor where earlier footage still sat paused, like a fossilized meteor impact waiting to be carbon dated by the public. "They'll dig anyway." "Let them dig," Taehyung said, "but let them hit bedrock instead of fan cams." Jungkook rubbed the back of his neck. "What if it gets worse?" "It already did," Taehyung answered. "We're just late to our own broadcast." Silence again, but this time it was different, less suffocating, more preparatory, a pre-transmission silence. The kind of pause you take before pressing go live not on a camera but on a truth that has finally earned its runtime. Taehyung placed his hand on the table again. This time Jungkook didn't flinch when he saw the scars. Jimin placed his hand on top of theirs. No music, no intro, no resolution filter, just hands, human, imperfect, and finally present. Because the moment Taehyung found the hidden name, it stopped being about ink. The studio lighting had always been engineered to flatter skin, not reveal truth. But tonight, it exposed everything like an accidental solar flare. Taehyung could feel it even from the green room hallway where he was standing now, hands still warm from the unspoken pact they formed minutes earlier. The lights hummed, electricity traveling through cables like a bloodstream feeding a moment the world was never supposed to witness this raw. The production crew outside was doing what crews always do when something becomes bigger than the segment: nothing. Not freezing, not panicking, just waiting. Waiting is a job description in live broadcasting. You don't run from a fire that already owns the oxygen. You watch to see which direction it burns. Taehyung stepped back into the main studio. No dramatic cut, no mic check, no countdown. The show didn't need to announce its resumption. The silence had already served as the transition. Jimin and Jungkook followed behind him like characters who realized the narrative had merged again into one timeline instead of splintering into fan fiction universes. The audience seats beyond the cameras were empty now, but the room felt fuller than any concert they ever played. Because when humans go silent, assumptions start cheering. Taehyung looked directly at the main camera, the one with the tiny red light that always seemed so small until it pointed back at you like a witness taking notes. "People think pain is a plot twist," Taehyung said aloud, voice carrying effortlessly in the acoustics of a room built for idols, not confessions. "Pain is just truth arriving late." The boom operator swallowed hard behind the rig. The audio was clean, crisp, dangerously sincere. SEO-optimized pain, CTR weaponized silence, RPM monetized heartbreak. None of it mattered more than the clarity of delivery right now. But clarity itself had become the highest performing metric. Jimin stood beside him, eyes forward, posture broadcast ready without looking rehearsed. "They're already clipping the moment," Jimin murmured quietly. "Might as well give them the full frame." Jungkook nodded, jaw tense but present. Better the real wound than a fictional funeral. Taehyung smirked faintly, not humorless, not healed, human. "If they want ghosts," he said, "let them at least haunt the correct house." The director outside exhaled and finally whispered, "Roll continuity feed." No B-roll, no music bed, just room tone. Because room tone was the new soundtrack. Taehyung continued speaking, not performing, not acting, not embellishing. Speaking like someone who had rehearsed the show for a decade but never rehearsed this sentence. The name in the tattoo wasn't a secret message. It was a misdiagnosis. We treated ink like it was the infection, when the infection was the silence that made the ink powerful. Jimin crossed his arms slightly, camera framing tight enough to look composed, open enough to look honest. Silence breeds ownership. Words breed responsibility. Jungkook added quietly, "Ink fades. Misunderstanding immortalizes." Taehyung leaned forward a few inches toward the camera, not breaking eye contact, not breaking posture, only breaking distance. "You can't blame a fandom for filling in the blanks. You blame the blanks." The room shifted, not audibly, not physically, structurally. The kind of shift architects feel more than audiences see. The tension of speculation was being replaced by the slower burn of accountability, and slow burns hold attention longer than explosions. Taehyung finally sat down again at the studio table, the same table from earlier, the one that had witnessed a slam, then a pact, now a testimony. "You wanted drama," he said to the lens. "This isn't drama, this is the invoice." Invoices are quieter than scandals, but they last longer. And for the first time tonight, Taehyung was ready to read one aloud. The camera's red indicator glowed like a quiet verdict. Taehyung sat at the table long enough for viewers to realize this was no longer about revelation. It was about ownership of narrative. In live studios, pauses are punctuation, and Taehyung had learned how to use them like an editor uses cuts, sparingly, intentionally, and with consequence. The floor manager outside was still holding the cue cards, but nobody was reading them anymore. The cards had bullet points. Taehyung's truth had none. and the world could feel the difference between scripted emphasis and unscripted impact. Scripted lines sell moments. Unscripted lines sell believability, and believability had the highest RPM of the night. Jimin leaned against a nearby camera rig, not blocking the shot, not stepping into it either. He had the stance of someone who knows his presence matters more than his words, but also knows the scene belongs to someone else right now. Jungkook stood near the lighting panel, eyes flicking toward Taehyung with a mix of guilt and admiration. He had spent years perfecting stage presence. He had never perfected damage control. Taehyung placed his palms flat on the table, dust still clinging to his sleeve cuffs like a metaphor that refused wardrobe styling. "People don't remember who shouted first," Taehyung said to the lens. "They remember who went silent longest." The director outside nodded slowly, realizing the story had shifted from conflict to aftermath, the terrain where legends actually grow. Legends don't emerge from noise. They emerge from the vacuum after it stops, and vacuums were expensive in fandom ecosystems. The studio monitor still displayed the paused frame from earlier, but the moment wasn't fossilized anymore. It was being annotated by the real participants now, not fan translators on social platforms. Taehyung glanced at it briefly, then back to the camera. "Ink can carry a name," he said, "but it can't carry a story by itself. That requires voices willing to be imperfect." Jimin uncrossed his arms and stepped closer to the table, not interrupting, only grounding. "We grew up believing perfection was the job," Jimin added, "but clarity was always the career." Jungkook looked down at his forearm, the place where ink once lived, where speculation still lived, and where regret was finally being acknowledged in public. "I removed the tattoo," he said quietly, "because it was the wrong monument. I didn't want a monument. I wanted closure." Taehyung shook his head, eyes sharp but not hostile. "Closure isn't removal, it's replacement." The room absorbed the sentence like a sponge designed for sound, not emotion. But emotion soaked anyway. The cameras didn't zoom. They didn't need to. The tension of the night had trained the audience to lean forward mentally, not visually. Taehyung continued, voice smooth but worn at the edges like well-played analog tape. "If you want to tell a story for 1 hour, don't give them spikes. Give them stamina. Give them a heartbeat they can follow without needing subtitles for intent." Jimin finally sat down beside him again, not as co-host, as continuity. Jungkook sat too, slightly delayed, slightly stiff but present. "Silence used to be our shield," Jungkook said. "Now it's the leak." "And leaks," Taehyung replied, "need narration." The studio lights flickered faintly. Micro fluctuations only engineers notice, but audiences interpret like foreshadowing. The flicker felt like acknowledgement that this broadcast was no longer controlled by red lights or cue cards. It was controlled by the people brave enough to keep speaking after the world stopped asking questions and started inventing answers. The studio had changed identities 3 times in one night: a stage, a battlefield, and now a courtroom built from air, cable noise, and consequences that arrived without warning. Taehyung sat at the table again, but this time his posture carried a different agenda. Not revenge, not reconciliation, not performance clarification. The slow, unglamorous work of numbing truth before speculation copyrighted the narrative forever. The set designers had chosen that table for its width, unaware it would later carry the emotional weight of 3 collapsing timelines. The audience beyond the cameras remained empty, but the silence in the room was now cooperative, not accusatory. It was waiting to be filled correctly. Taehyung leaned slightly forward, eyes locked on the lens like a man who understood that the red light was no longer a symbol of pressure. It was an invitation to stop fiction from decorating the truth with furniture that never existed. "Fans will build palaces from fragments," Taehyung said, voice calm but edged with the precision of someone who had been misquoted by silence before. "Our job now is to hand them the blueprint before they crown the wrong architect." Jimin glanced sideways at him, then at Jungkook, who was finally seated as well. Jungkook's hands were steady now, but not comfortable. Truth doesn't comfort immediately. It only corrects posture. They think the name was hidden for romance, Taehyung continued. It was hidden for survival, not secrecy, not symbolism, survival. When silence is your only defense, even ink becomes a hostage. The director outside the frame rubbed his temples. The show had no music bed, yet the packing carried its own soundtrack now. Honesty, pauses that earned attention, sentences built to hold stamina, not spike emotions like clickbait captions misinterpreted as intent. Jungkook finally spoke, voice lower but not fragile. I didn't want the world to read the tattoo like a love letter, he said. It was an old signature from someone who tried to own the silence we all lived in. Taehyung nodded once. The nod was not forgiveness. It was acknowledgement of correct genre. Then we misfiled the emotion, he said, not the loyalty. Jimin placed both palms on the table again, the same ritual from earlier but now with new context. If the fandom wants silence, Jimin said, we give them narrative instead. Narrative travels farther than assumptions. Taehyung exhaled, slower this time. Controlled, not suppressed. Ink fades on skin, he said. But if you do narrate the silence around it, the internet will laminate it forever. The room stayed quiet for another beat. An intentional beat this time, not an accidental gap. Taehyung looked at the camera again, voice leveling into a cadence built for long listening, long retention, and long emotional engagement. A voice made to hold 1 hour, not fracture it. The world thinks silence means guilt, Taehyung said. Silence was the trap. Words are the escape route. We're just finally drawing the map ourselves. Jungkook looked at him directly. No rivalry left in the angle now, only shared history. Then let's speak before they bury the silence for us. Taehyung gave a small, tired smirk. We don't bury silence, we annotate it. And for the first time that night, the studio felt less like a headline and more like a documentary, finally filming the correct subjects. Because the moment after a hidden name is found, the real battle is never the ink. It's who gets to narrate the silence before the world names it for you.